Welcome to Real Talk, a place where we have real conversations about faith, doubt, and everything in between. I'm your host, Reverend Thea Curry-Fuson, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, friends, and fellow pastors at FUMC Pearland to talk about freedom. And so, gentlemen, why don't you just reintroduce yourselves and tell us why you said yes to talk about this big topic today.
My name is John McClure. I'm one of the associate pastors at First United Methodist Church in Pearland. And I'm here because Thea told me to be here. I thought this was a really cool topic to be able to talk about, especially around July 4th. And so I'm really excited about this.
John, Thea, hi. I'm Pastor Reggie Clemens, the lead pastor at First United Methodist Church in Pearland. And again, very happy to be here again to join all of you. This is, as John said, a very interesting topic, particularly in light of Independence Day holiday. And so we really wanted to lead some to real credence in terms of what freedom actually means.
Yeah. So we are recording the week of July 4th, just a few days before. This is going to come out a couple weeks later. But we thought in this time, as our whole nation is really thinking and celebrating and preparing to celebrate this big topic of freedom, we thought, what would that look like if we sat down and had a conversation about what freedom really means to us as individuals, but also as a faith community. And so let's jump in. How do you define freedom? Where do you see it in reality?
So I think freedom for so many people is hard to define because it means something different to so many different people. I think that it's a word that evolves over time. I don't think that in my 20s I look at it the same way I do now. And I would say that not only in my faith journey, but also in the world that I live in. I think that it's really great to be star-spangled and sparkled all the time. When you grow up in a small town in Northeast Texas and you think everybody looks at it the same way you do. Yeah. But it's not. And so to define freedom, I think is a very complex thing. But I would say for me, freedom has come the more that I have sought out what it is that Christ has for my life.
That's good. I probably think of it now more in terms of a spiritual freedom than I actually do from the perspective of God and country or that way, because, from the standpoint, and it gets me an opportunity to look at it, that freedom means absence of bondage, absence of things that are holding you back from being able to do something. And I love the fact that as we go on this faith journey, that we are all free to accept this invitation. Yet it is not something that is forced on us, nor should it be from that standpoint. I mean, I don't think that's good religion. I think that the freedom that I look for in Christ is how Christ invites us to this life and to free us from the bondage of sin and to free us from those things that we don't. I understand that there's certainly all kinds of aspects as we celebrate Independence Day of that we were free from under the rule of a tyrannical country. I get that. I think that certainly happened throughout time in terms of countries being at war with one another. But the freedom that I truly seek is what teaches me in my faith to continue to free myself from those things that are not like God, that allow me to be more like Christ. And that, to me, is true freedom indeed.
Yeah. As you were talking both, I thought about how much my excitement over holidays have really changed. I can probably remember as early as my 20s and definitely as a child where I loved Independence Day. Like watching fireworks was the most fun thing, I thought I could do, and a big barbecue with family and friends. And those things are all still really, really great. But I also realized as I've gotten older that had almost little to do with what freedom is really about, right? Mm-hmm. I've never lived under a tyrannical, government. I've never lived behind bars. I've never had some of those physical realities of a lack of freedom. And so sometimes I think also I've struggled with, well, what am I actually celebrating? Until I began a relationship with Christ and started to understand freedom as this liberation, not necessarily from anything physical, but from all of my mental chains. I have been in abusive situations where I was in chains mentally to a life and a lifestyle and to a belief system that was that I had no value, if not, if any little. And so freedom from that, or freedom from the idea that I am only the sum of my best choices and the worst, right? That while not only am I not tied to my mistakes, but I'm also not tied to only my successes, that there is so much more to me. And these are the things of freedom. And while I don't maybe get excited about one day with barbecue and fancy fireworks in the sky, it's about living that out in celebration. I think, I strive to do it daily. I strive to remind myself and live like that's true. And when I think about places I see freedom in reality, so often I'm drawn to children because they haven't put on those chains yet. They haven't been led to believe that they don't have value or worth or goodness. I think about how little girls will wear tutus and rubber boots and a pirate hat and just be like, this is who I am. And I often wonder, when did I stop doing that? When did I start deciding I was no longer free of that, or the way kids can run and scream with joy as loud as they can. And I think, when's the last time I let myself be that free and happy?
That is such a great perspective of absolutely true freedom. Although I do have to basically be clear about one thing. I do get excited about barbecue. Okay, that's real. Okay, but I think from a real world perspective, what we don't see is we don't see how much bondage people actually are suffering. So we're probably running around thinking that for particularly Independence Day and where we get to live and the things we get to do, that we're all running around free. But yet we're not. You have debt as a bondage. You have just how you may be treated by people as a bondage. You have sometimes your job is a bondage, or so you're enslaved by things. Lack of money or being a slave to money. You're in bondage, so you're not free. Which is why I think that even to me, this is something that's probably more important for people that are outside the church than are actually in the church, because I think there's a lack of clarity about what it is that Jesus actually offers. And so if you think about it from the standpoint of, if you truly realize all that you can truly be because of the love of Christ, then it can actually make you be able to realize your freedom, even though you may be bounded or binded by the things of the world. That in essence, you can say, but I'm not going to let that hold me back. I mean, I think that the truth is we all know we're not all free. Even as we celebrate this, we're not all free. We will not all be free on July 4th. But the fact of the matter is this ability that we truly have to say, I can be different. I can rise above this to where true freedom exists. To me, that's a message for the world. That's not just a message for the church. That's a message for the world. And we can all think about those things. We're getting ready to go in this sermon series about, testifying and your stories or whatever. And we've all got stories. We can all talk about those things that, I was captured by something, but now I'm no longer bound by that. What a freeing experience that is. So I get excited just about the word freedom and the promise that it holds if I hold true to what I believe.
Well, and I think that there's that chance that we have to be real in those situations. I think that maybe some of the time the reason that people outside the church don't see it that way is because we put on our face. We put on the church face, or even the things that we have that make us not free, that hold us down. We have a tendency to take and project those on other people. Because it's easier to focus on somebody else's stuff than it is on your own.
Hey, right, got that.
And so I think in those things, I think that's some of the stuff that we have to struggle with as we seek freedom. Because as long as we're continuing to do that, we can't have that either.
Yeah. I think about how the strive for authenticity is actually a strive for freedom. I know for me, the less masks I have to wear, the less facades, the less people's expectations I'm striving to meet, the more free I am. And I can't help but think of, you were mentioning some people are a slave to their job, to money, to debt, to their love of money or success. And I think about how free Jesus actually lived, as in he had no physical home he had to pay for and or upkeep. He had no job he had to go and clock into and, create a profit of some sort. He even freed himself from the Jewish laws and expectations, and instead said, I think you got it wrong here. You need to look at this a little bit more deeply. And he really freed himself from some of those things that I think, like you said, especially those of us who are believers will often tie ourselves to. These expectations, these rituals, these rules that we have decided we have to follow in order to succeed, be loved, receive grace, accomplish something. And Jesus showed with his life so blatantly, hey, I refuse to be a slave to any of that.
Yeah.
And I'm here to show you that you too could live free. Yeah, that means you're going to have to let go of some things and be open to willing to receive this freedom I'm giving so willingly.
The lie is you can't be free. You cannot be freed. It's just not going to happen no matter what you do. That's the big lie. And we certainly know that because we believe that not to be true because we've seen real freedom, even in things we may struggle with, even in things we may still struggle with. We know that freedom does exist, can be obtained. It's kind of interesting. I thought you were going to go one more because I was like, you're getting ready to preach now because I thought he freed himself from death.
Yep.
Okay, he did. And at that point, I'm like saying, well, he gives us an opportunity to say, you know what, we can be better than this. We can do better than this. We do not have to be bound by the stuff the world wants to bind us by. So if that is true, and if I can hold on to that and believe that, then I got a shot at this. I got a shot at actually becoming my best self, and my best self is going to allow Jesus Christ to live within me to be expressed outside of me. And so I'm like, that does excite me from the standpoint, but again, I got to be honest, it excites me more for people that are new to the faith who don't think that's real at all, even more so than people who have been hearing this for 100 years. Because we get patterned, y'all know that. We get kind of patterned in terms of what we deal with and what we kind of accept and even what we expect sometimes. And I think one of the things about freedom is freedom can be brand new every day. So I look forward to that, don't you?
Well, and I thought you were going to go a step further, and I thought you were going to say freed us from death.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
At the same time, I think with this topic, just like so many other things in life, we are our own worst enemy.
Okay.
And I think that it's that we either choose to accept a lie that we won't be free, or we choose to accept all the things that tie us down for those things. And we've all said that as we sat here. I just think that there's so much of that happens constantly. And the world in itself is only getting that message to people quicker and quicker and quicker. I remember like growing up and teen magazines being what was holding people like, this is who you have to be. This is what you're supposed to be. Now it's advertisements upon advertisements that are in the palm of their hand constantly. And it's one of those things that more than anything, I continue to go back into just how much the gospel is very simple and how much we make things very complicated.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. When you were saying, I thought you were going to go a step further. I was like, oh, and Reggie's fixing to go with this next one on that. It is that simple.
Yeah.
It's just that we make it complicated.
Yeah. You mentioned this is exciting for those who don't believe. And I look back at before I was really in a relationship with God and had my life changed by Jesus Christ. I did see the religious as full of rules, so much so that I thought I was going to beat the system and just repent at 80 before I died. And then I'd get into heaven and wouldn't have to worry about following all the rules during my fun youth-filled life. Now, unfortunately, I lived into that, and life wasn't so fun. It was dark and lonely and exhausting and sad. And it wasn't until a relationship with God through Jesus Christ that I began to, truly be liberated into something new. But what is your response to those who do see faith, religion, even Christianity, not as freeing, but as binding, as a bunch of rules that you have to follow, certain ways you have to behave, and expectations that are put on you by God directly and or indirectly by followers?
I don't necessarily, it's not the strings attached view that I look at as much as it is the aspect of the other side. And I think it's one of those things that so many people have a hard time viewing and understanding, that there is a God that knows everything about us and created us and sees all that there is there. But then either what we would say allows bad things to happen, or looks and says, would allow good things to happen to this person and bad things to happen. When I think of strings, those are the areas that I see so many people going to. And it's this area of understanding for me, again, that we all make decisions. And in those decisions, there are things that we deal with, usually of our own doing. And so when it comes to the rules or the things that are there, I have plenty of friends who are not Christians, who are moral people, who follow rules every day. And in some ways are much better rule followers than people that I know that I've gone to church with over my life. And so for me, I think it continues to come back to people looking at God kind of as a puppet master, or as just this free-for-all person who's rolling dice in a cube, and whatever lands is what happens to whoever happens to. And there's this resolve that has to happen there, in the understanding of God knows everything about you. And that is the beauty of all of this, is that, we talk about Psalms 139 all the time. I mean, it's what I start my day with. I say that all the time. But in that, like, understanding that there is a creator who knows everything about us, everything that we've done, and everything that we're going to choose to do. And in that, loves us despite all of that. Yeah. And at the same time, continues to show us a pathway of something that will breathe life into us. Right. Not of something that is, if you do this, I will love you. Not if you follow these 10 rules. Not if you do everything right. But I want life abundant for you. But you have to choose that. It's not for me to push that on you. You have to choose it. And I think that we get mixed up with moral laws and Christianity way too much.
Well, not only do you have to choose it, you have to want it. It's kind of interesting. And we were talking about this earlier today. I believe that there is a difference in terms of how we understand rules and discipline. Okay. So rules can be allegedly created to create an even playing field. And yet we know that there are some rules that are punitive. There are rules that actually create a situation where people are not in the best place. And then there are, of course, those rules that we don't want to follow because we just want to do something else. Even if they are created to benefit everyone so that no one gets injured and no one gets hurt, or there is a sense of equity or equality or whatever, but we don't want to do that because it's not what we want to do. Discipline, I have come to understand, is quite different than that. Discipline is something that is supposed to help us become better. So when we follow the disciplines that have been laid out, even if you talk about rules, well, Jesus came and said, well, I'm throwing all this out. This is what you're supposed to do. You guys got it wrong. And came and continued to try to teach how we're supposed to follow these disciplines that God has given us to, in essence, become the best of ourselves, the best we can be. There are times that obviously people don't even want to do that, but I personally cannot argue with that. I was reading something today. If you think about someone that begins playing the piano, and if you find the discipline to practice every day, what it will ultimately do is free you up to be able to just kind of roll with it and do whatever, become Elton John. But you've got to have that discipline to truly get to that point where it becomes second nature. It becomes a part of who you are. So I certainly, I can relate when folks basically say that, well, if they're just the church or faith-based organization just want to establish a bunch of rules just so everybody can do it, and they don't even always do it, then yeah, I probably don't want any part of that. I get it. I see that. But I don't think that's what a real life in Christ is.
Yeah. Well, I think it's back to that idea of Jesus not being about religion, but about relationship.
Yeah.
And I think about my marriage. Now, yes, we have like maybe some rules, as in, do not wake me up. I don't care what you think I need to be. Trust that I'm a grown up and I'll get up when I need to get up. Or my rule is to not leave doors and cabinets wide open because that's irritating and whatever, So there's a couple rules, but in all honesty, when I do go back behind myself and close all the pantry doors that I left open, it's not because it's a rule that I'm afraid to break. It's because I have a relationship with my husband.
Right.
And I love him. And if this is something important to him, even if it's not so important to me, I'm going to love him and close those doors, right? And I think about some of the bigger rules we have in relationships. It's not because it's against the rules, so I'm not going to do it, but it's because I love this person. Mm-hmm. I care for this person. I'm going to show up authentically in relationship. And that means that these requests and these needs and these simple structures for how a relationship is going to work, they need to be honored too. And I really look at the same, with God. And let's even go back to those 10 commandments. I love the interpretation that says these are less about what you cannot do, but what you will not do when you're in relationship with me. Mm. When you are in relationship with God completely and fully, you'll have no room for other gods. Mm-hmm. You'll have no room for other things to take your time, energy, effort, your worship, mm-hmm. right? When you're in relationship with God, you'll have no room to hurt your neighbor, to covet after what he or she has. Mm. You don't have room to kill, to lie. You don't have room for that because you'll be so full mm-hmm. of the relationship that you are receiving and entering into with God directly, especially through Jesus Christ, And so this reminder that I agree that it's not necessarily binding, but it is liberating. Mm-hmm. The same is true with a budget. A budget is not restrictive. It actually frees you to do what you actually want to do, to go on that vacation, right? To pay off that debt, to dream big so that you can fund something really
Sure.
important. And I would agree the same that yes, there are many people who are in faith organizations that seem a little preoccupied and or talk a lot about the rules. There are those who are much more about the relationship and say, bring your faults, bring your mistakes, bring all the ways you're not hitting the mark, and you're welcome here too.
Well, all I could think about was earlier when you were talking about kids. My middle child, Lily, she is the one that is going to, not necessarily a tutu, but she's going to pick out shoes that don't match with something. She has her father's, dressing and
There is
and
that.
fashion sense. But in that, allowing others to have the freedom that they need to be themselves as well. I think far too often we push people to where we think they need to be.
Yeah.
And in that relationship piece is so big. How often do we try to, and I use in quotations, save people from themselves? And how hard that is, rather than understanding that they have the same freedoms that everyone else does. And that goes all the way from kids to friends to everything that there is in between. That relationship piece, I think, sometimes can be like the most freeing, but can also be very binding in the fact of when those situations and those things aren't set there. But yeah, I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking about how often it is that, yes, this is something that my 4-year-old wants to be a 4-year-old, but we sit and go, oh no, we don't need to wear that out in public. Or no, you need to make sure that you do this, because if you don't act this way, then people won't accept you with this. And I think maybe I'm the only one that does that. But in that, trying to save people from our own bondage that we put ourselves in.
Yeah. Yeah. Where are some other places that you find yourself living unfree, despite our residency and citizenship in this country, but also as followers of Jesus? Where are you still living unfree?
Man, I you know what? Thinking about that question, unfree, I don't necessarily see myself as being unfree if the majority of the things that I want to do, I recognize that I have the freedom to choose to do them, so I get to do that. So I don't necessarily look at them as being something that binds me or where I'm unfree. Like, you certainly heard the saying, I owe, so off to work I go. And I understand that. But I don't see that as something I'm not bound to do that for the paycheck or whatever. I love what I do. I love what I get to do. And I love, you mentioned about, relationship and things you have to do within a relationship. And again, I think if you look at it the same way, you have the freedom to choose to do these things because they will make your relationship better. They will actually show how much you love someone. Where in reality, you could also choose not to do that. Say, I don't really care how often you want the doors closed. I'm not doing it because I don't want to do it. And then at some point, you have to really figure out, well, how does that work out for you? How does that work out for the two of you or whatever, if that's going to constantly be about that in any relationship? If there's going to be a constant struggle because someone's not actually trying to make things work, then you may be thinking that you're free, but you really aren't. You're probably binding yourself more than you actually realize. So I don't necessarily look at it. I think it's a fair question, but I don't necessarily look at myself, honestly, unfree anywhere, because I have really given a lot of thought and effort and prayer to the things that I do, and doing them actually is for a greater purpose, which frees me to make that choice to do that, and therefore I'm okay with that.
Yeah. It sounds like too you're recognizing that even in your choices to whether it's to follow God's will and or not, that like there's freedom there too, right? That we truly have this freedom, and no matter what choice we do make, there's freedom to have that choice.
That's what free will is.
Yeah.
I would say there's still parts of, I laugh because I went to see the Inside Out 2 the other day, and to not ruin the whole movie for everyone, there's a part where the main characters get locked in a vault, and there's this big, just ominous creature that's in there, and they say, well, that's her deepest, darkest secrets, and they get out, but the secret locks itself back up in a vault. And I think that not necessarily the secret, but maybe the way we see ourselves sometimes has the ability to do both. Again, it has the ability to be very freeing when we look and we see the areas that we can improve, and we feel the power to do that. I think there are times where we look in there and we think that nobody gets that. I would say especially with teenagers and people that I work with a lot. No one will understand how I feel, or you just wouldn't understand. Those things are very real that are there. And in that, it continues to just tie us down. Whereas in the more I think that we share those things, understanding that everybody has those, the more that can be freeing for everyone. I think that those are pieces of it that are big. You know, I talked today in staff about we were going through the story of Saul and David in one of the classes that I'm in. As we were going through, we were talking about the envious side of Saul. And our professor asked, and I just said, there are times that I am envious of other pastors. Like, if I'm being real, like, their gifts are amazing. And I don't sit back and really focus on the gifts that God gave me. I focus on theirs, because that's how envy works. You know, it doesn't work in the way where you sit back and you look at all the wonderful things. But he asked who we saw, and I said, you know, I think I see myself as Saul in this a lot more than I do David. And he just openly said, how better off would we be if we were honest about what character we really are in these stories? And that was why I thought that the movie series that we just did was so great. You get to see yourself in stories. And if you're honest with yourself and you have the ability to look at that and do it, as I said, you know, you get to look at the man in the mirror and make a change. But that's really where it is. I think that freedom to choose that, and not be lost in or distracted even by a reality that's not there. And that can go on the positive side and the negative side. But I do think that I think in every one of us, there is something that's inside of us that does hold us back at different times. Some of us are better at hiding it than others, but that doesn't mean that we don't all have it.
And I wonder what might happen if we were willing to be a little bit more honest and real. Like, I really appreciate you just sharing that, as I think about the places where I still live unfree, despite the freedom that I've been given in Christ. It's those times that I too listen to the crafty one, the whispers in my ear. You can do this better. Come on. You can figure this out. God didn't really mean you have to forgive. God didn't really mean that you should be generous, not with everything. And something I've really been wrestling with lately is how much I think I can figure it all out. How often I think, well, if I could just put enough time, energy, and effort, I can figure this out. And while I do realize I'm an intelligent woman who has accomplished things, in reality, there's more freedom in trusting God. And instead of saying, God, give me the answers, being quiet and listening to what God is already doing, watching and learning and being willing to follow, instead of thinking I always have to be the leader. And so that's a place where I know that I'm beginning to wrestle with, man, I'm tied to that. I'm chained to this idea that I have to have it all figured out. These people, I don't know who, they don't have names, are looking at me and waiting for me and wanting me to solve their problems when in fact, no, Christ has already done that. And if I'm more willing to give up even those chains, what additional layer of liberation might I find?
It's really interesting if just kind of thinking about what you guys have just said. If you really think about those things that we have created or we create, and then find a way to make them acceptable, then we lose sight of the fact that these are things that actually bind us. Envy binds us. Pride binds us. Hate binds us. A lack of insecurity binds us. Things that we actually want to take and look at evil. Evil binds us. But yet, you're also bound if you want to take some things that are obviously evil and actually make them not so bad. Or even as you were just pointing out, that was actually from Scripture. Well, God didn't actually say that. Or that's really okay. And so we're making those decisions, and we don't really see how these things bind us to not becoming the best of ourselves that we can be. They bind us, and they continue to perpetuate the problem. They don't solve anything. So lack of a desire for diversity binds us. If we're not focused on that, then what we're doing is we're focused on it's got to be this way. So you're always going to be mad because it's never going to be this way. So, and I'm like, what is it that we miss? So I'm going to tell you what I think we miss. I think that there is as great as freedom is, there's also a fear. Because at that point, you're dealing with something and you're totally letting go. And in essence, to be free, if you think about the movie The Shawshank Redemption, and the greatest scene in the movie is when the guy stands up out of the river of crap and just holds his arms up like this. How much freer can you be than that? Or whatever. But he's free. But I wonder
as he's
how
been
many
washed away by
as
the
he's
rain.
been washed away by the rain. How many of us can actually say, looking at that, if that's your life, most of us would pretty much say, I'm probably safer in this pipe or safer in this cell because then the guards aren't chasing me and I don't have to worry about anything. I'm not going to get all dirty. I don't have to go through this. So freedom to aspire for freedom, there may be some fear associated with it because of what you have to give up. And I'm like saying, you know what? No, it can't be about what you're giving up. It's got to be what you're gaining. Yeah. So that's kind of how I look at it. Now, I am preaching now, Thea, okay?
And that was what was interesting about that book, the Dodging Spears and Dancing Madly. There were two words.
It's a great book, too.
There were two words that were constantly put with envy. And I'd always thought of one, but I'd never thought of the other. The first one was anger, which with envy I always thought was. The other one was the exact word you just said, fear. And how much fear creates false realities. Fear in so many ways can make you delusional.
Yeah.
To what is actually going on. And that's why I say what I said about growing up in a small town. I can really remember, and I've said this before, I can't remember when the Atlanta Olympics were, 93, 94. But in Atlanta, Texas, they had the redneck games. So instead of the discus, they were throwing hubcaps. They were doing all this stuff. They had like a stand, like they did this whole thing. And Good Morning America came out to Atlanta, Texas, because Atlanta, Georgia was holding this. And I remember walking away after watching my father make a fool of himself, doing all these crazy, stupid things with everybody else in the town, thinking, you know what? I live in the greatest town, in the greatest state, Texas, because everything is better in Texas, in the greatest country in this world. There is no place better than this one little small town. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of really great things about Atlanta, Texas. But I think that as we dive into things, there are things that are hidden there that come from the word pride. And I always found that funny because in Atlanta, Texas, the athletic uniform, the shirt and pants that you wore, that everybody just killed themselves to get, were called prides. In the middle of the football field, the word was pride. When the band snapped to attention, they screamed pride. And you would think that that was because we were the lions. No, we were the rabbits. It still doesn't make any sense. You can laugh. It's okay.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. That's a whole other story.
Your school mascot was the rabbits?
Rabbits. Which is a whole other story for a whole other time.
That's a totally different podcast.
But in that, the understanding that I had made this reality that just wasn't there. And in that, how wonderful life was in Atlanta, Texas, it wasn't wonderful for everybody.
Yeah.
How I was lucky enough to have a grandfather who took the school that nobody wanted when segregation stopped. How I was able to have a family who stretched their arms out to people that didn't look like them.
Yeah.
But not everybody in Atlanta, Texas was free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that that's a sensitive subject for a lot of people. But in 2024, not everybody that walks around this country is free.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time for the scales to fall off of my eyes to be able to see that.
Yeah.
Through meeting people, through horrible situations happening in people's lives, to see them have to deal with that and live with it.
Yeah.
To understand that life was not how it was for a white boy from Atlanta, Texas. And that's why I think, as I said earlier, freedom looks different to everybody.
My question would be, if God has both created us free and offered Jesus Christ so that we might know it and live like it's so, why do we still fall into capture? And then what is our responsibility? Those of us who have accepted our freedom, especially for those who aren't. So why would God allow this? And then what are we to do about it?
I think it's an interesting perspective to look at what we may choose to do as something that God is actually allowing us to do. I think going back to the concept of free will, and God is not the puppet master. We are here with the capability to make our own decisions about what we do. Now, while we make some of the decisions that we make are actually from the standpoint of whatever may be driving us, how we allow sin to sometimes win and take over, this is what enables you to do some stuff that you really know you shouldn't do. But we get to make those decisions. And I think, again, I got to go back to the same thing. I think a lot of times it's fear. It is fear that drives us. It's fear that if I don't do it this way, I'm not going to have control. I may get hurt. Someone may try to take advantage of me. I mean, we hear all the same stuff because even if you think about something that you may think is actually truly, totally, without a question, good in your own mind, okay? Why is it that you know there's someone out there that's going to disagree with that, that's going to see it differently than that? Why, if it's good, why would anybody see it differently? If it makes sense, why is anybody going to be on the other side of it? But we know that's exactly what happens, because a lot of times there's not a real concept, if there ever was. I don't think it exists today. There's not as much of a perspective and concept that let's try to do things, create institutions and laws and requirements for the greater benefit of everybody. Let's try to do this for the benefit of whoever feels they need to be benefited at that time, and then have that access. Let's do that. So if we are able to make that happen, then we don't have to worry about whatever happens to everybody else. I only have to worry about what happens to me. I gotta get mine, right? I'm gonna say that again. I gotta get mine, right?
I think it's the other aspect of what's easy too sometimes. I think that there is this thing in us that we wire ourselves to the path of least resistance. Again, not making it the right path. But, we talk about this when we do calendaring, at the church. Are we doing this because we always do it, or are we doing this because this is what's good for us for this year to reach more people? And it makes you question a lot of things, and it does make all those fears come out. I think there's a lot of that, especially as we're about to come up into this political season. Where people draw lines. I was watching something the other day, and a guy said, I don't understand what is now, why it matters so much to so many people. He said, when my grandfather was alive, you would never have heard somebody ask, who did you vote for? Because that was just something you didn't talk about. And maybe because of fear, that's what's got us to where we're at, is that we haven't had the hard conversations, or we haven't had those times maybe out of fear. Just said, I see things like this, and you see things this way. I can still see you as a creation of God. I can still see your worth. I can still love you. Like those are big things that somewhere down the road, I think that most of us have lost. It's either you're on my side or you're not. And it's very much, in so many ways, the only group I can think of, it's a very Pharisee type of way of looking at stuff. And we all know what happened there. I think that there is so much room for so much, and there's so much room for us to learn from each other.
Yeah. When I think about why we who were created and set free by God directly have the ability to fall into capture, it's just that reminder that love isn't love if it's not free. And if God wanted robots, that's what God would have created.
Sure.
But instead, God chose to create humanity with all of our intricacies, all of our beauties and difficulties, and knowing that only when we are truly free to choose whichever path we truly want, then whenever we choose love, then it's real. Not just with one another, but also with God directly. And so that had to happen. And so those of us who do choose that freedom, who choose to live in that way, then I think our responsibility is to live it out loud, to show other people that this is real. This is not a relationship of rules. I'm not trying to earn my way anywhere or maintain or keep my salvation, but instead it's already been given to me freely. And my job is only to receive it. And if I'm truly receiving it, then a natural outcome is that other people will see it too, and a willingness to share that. And so I guess my hope would be, as we continue celebrating all of our freedom and all the unique ways we have to do that in this country, is that those of us who do believe we've been truly liberated by Christ would live free. And that means removing the demands and the requirements and the rules we not only put on ourselves, but of those around us.
Yeah.
and to show what it means to truly be in a relationship with God. And that might mean we have to put some more time into our relationship with God before we can show others. What about you two, as a kind of a closing thought? What would be your hope for those of us living free and how we can really share that freedom?
I think on the sharing part, for me, it's literally like the moment that you're watching this, the next moment is the moment that you can choose this. Like knowing that there's going to be times where it feels like you're still trapped, but knowing that every second you have that choice to be unfree. I mean, to just, you're choosing to be unfree or to be free. And in that, knowing that whatever has happened doesn't define for what's going to happen.
1 Peter 2:16 says that live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover up for evil, but living as servants of God. And I think what I would truly pray that I would be able to live in a way that would show people that they do have the ability to make the right choice, to make choices, to choose freedom rather than to choose bondage, to do everything I can to lead people on that path, realizing that, as you said, God has truly given us the ability to choose otherwise. But we have that ability. That doesn't mean we have to choose that.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for coming together to have this honest conversation. And thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about the ways that we are striving to live free at First United Methodist Church Pearland, I hope you'll check us out on the website. And I hope that you'll come back for next week's episode too. We'll see you then.
Go Mighty Rabbits.
Real Talk Podcast is produced by First United Methodist Church Pearland in collaboration with Pearland Podcast Studios, recorded here in Pearland, Texas. We invite you to check out our website at fumcpearland.org to check out additional events and opportunities for you to engage in real talk about faith and relationships.